before the film, I mentioned the lawsuit that had delayed release of Conflict for 2 years. Now, the studio must have feared it would lose that case, because in early 1945, it began production on The Two Mrs. Carrolls, also starring Humphrey Bogart, which is essentially the same story. Man offs wife for younger woman, minus the specific details that were bones of contention in the lawsuit, story points involving the specifics of how the murder was committed. Alexis Smith, in fact, plays the sought-after ingenue in both films. Now, Bogart despised making The Two Mrs. Carrolls, even more than Conflict, but he just couldn't pass up the chance to finally play opposite the great Barbara Stanwyck, his first and only chance, as it turned out. Ironically, The Two Mrs. Carrolls would also sit on the shelf for a couple of years before being released. In its case, however, litigation was not to blame. The fact was, after his highly publicized marriage to Bacall, the public was no longer interested in seeing the bad Bogart. He'd become a romantic leading man in real life, which is what he'd play, with rare exceptions, for the rest of his career. Now, Dwight Taylor was one of the more sophisticated screenwriters in Hollywood, having been an editor at the New Yorker magazine and a playwright before turning out scripts for such musical classics as Top Hat and Follow the Fleet. He was also versatile, as he proved with his polished jobs on film noir favorites I Wake Up Screaming, Pick Up on South Street, and Conflict. Now, if I've got a gripe with this script, it's with the character of Evelyn, who's never really developed or even given much to do, considering that the plot revolves around Bogart's obsession for her. According to Warner production files, this role was originally intended for another 21-year-old ingenue on the lot, Eleanor Parker. The essential, if thankless, role of Catherine Mason was played by Rose Hobart, once an ingenue herself.
You're in love with her, aren't you? I thought so. Well, what are you going to do about it?
A classically trained stage actress from her teenage years, Hobart made a name for herself acting opposite Joseph Schildkraut and Eva Le Gallienne in the stage version of Molnar's Le Lion, a role she recreated in the 1930 film version, her movie debut. Now, although she had her most prestigious role opposite Frederick March in the 1931 Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Hobart made a bigger name for herself, at least within the industry, for her crusade to improve working conditions for actors. Outraged by the extreme hours and conditions under which actors worked in the early 30s, Hobart became one of the founders of the Screen Actors Guild, helping put an end to exploitive studio practices. Now, the studio bosses didn't forget. Even though she was not a communist, Hobart was blacklisted for refusing to cooperate with HUAC investigators. She never made another feature film after 1949. Now, if it seems like every week I'm mentioning yet another artist who was blacklisted during the height of the film noir era, believe me, I don't have to reach to find them. Most of the films we show had at least one above-the-line talent whose career was derailed or shunted into the shadows by the witch hunt. The distrust and the betrayals that resulted played a significant part in the dread and paranoia that was part and parcel of the film noir era. So let's continue the conversation about all aspects of noir over on our Facebook page and Twitter feed. And if you're that technically adept, I suggest doing a little web search for Rose Hobart and Joseph Cornell. You will find an experimental film from 1936 in which the avant-garde New York artist, Cornell was noted for his assemblages of found material, well, he edited one of Hobart's films, East of Borneo, to exclude everything but the actress. He admitted to having developed something of an obsession with her. Cornell scored it with a couple of records scavenged from a junk store and screened the 18-minute film at silent film speed, projected through blue glass. The film is called simply Rose Hobart. Could this have been the first celebrity tribute music video? And the last note for today. Composer Friedrich Hollander, who composed the score for Conflict, was another early colleague of Kurt Bernhardt's in Berlin, whose career had barely started before he was joining the exodus of talent out of Nazi-controlled Germany. Now, although he composed more than 100 film scores, Hollander's lasting fame may be as a songwriter. He was Marlene Dietrich's go-to guy for musical numbers, having written the song, in the original German, that became her signature, Falling in Love Again. Credit to Sammy Lerner for the English translation. Now, next week on Noir Alley, more marital woes. Dick Powell is the one suffering matrimonial ennui in Pitfall. And his means of escape isn't murder, it's Lisbeth Scott. Maybe Sidney Greenstreet was right. Love and its frustration are the root of all evil, or at least the root of all film noir.